Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up, to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 17 of the Leadership Conversations podcast. I am your host, Jono White, founder and principal consultant of Clarity. And today's guest is Pablo Cussatti. Pablo is the Chief Supply Chain Officer for Godiva Chocolatier. And Pablo has nearly 30 years of food manufacturing and operations experience and a proven record of improving safety, quality, service, and costs. He started his career as an engineer, building and designing food manufacturing processes, and now he's run large multi-facility operations for Pepsi, Dean Foods, Pinnacle Foods, Blue Apron, Ventura Foods, and now Godiva Chocolatier. Pablo, welcome, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, John.
Now, I am really interested. I guess, to be honest, the sector that you work in is one that I haven't had much experience working in myself, but I find it really, really interesting for a number of reasons. So I'm personally just really looking forward to the conversation today. But to help listeners understand, I guess, a little bit about your role, Chief Supply, in your role as Chief Supply Chain Officer, and to understand Godiva Chocolatier, and maybe just get a picture of where you're based and what the sort of footprint looks like of the organization that you're working for in your role. Can you give us a bit of a snapshot of those things?
Sure. I mean, Godiva is a well-known and probably the highest quality chocolate you can find out there. And what's great about the company is it's global. And so I manage three separate regions: Americas, APAC, Asia Pacific, and Europe and the Middle East, EMEA. I have heads of supply chains in each of the regions. And if you think about supply chain, right, it's the whole it's the sourcing, which is our procurement teams, the making, which is our manufacturing teams, the deliver, which is the logistics team, and then all the planning associated with making sure that I have the right chocolates at the right locations, at the right places, at the right times. And the other uniqueness about Godiva, it's a true omni-channel approach. We have retail stores and cafes. We sell in specialty markets such as your department stores. You'll find us. Additionally, we sell in food, drug, and mass, and club, and we have our own e-commerce channel as well as sell on others e-commerce of other organizations as well.
Well, I tell you what, the word that comes to mind hearing you unpack that is complex. That sounds very, very complex to me. Not having any experience in supply chain, that's the word that comes to mind. But I'm looking forward to hearing you. I guess we're going to talk more broadly about leadership, but yeah, I just think it's amazing that you lead that and lead so many teams to. Yeah, I just think it's really incredible. So let's talk about you a bit before I spend too much time just asking asking questions about how on earth supply chain works for such a big organization. I think it's very cool. But tell us about Pablo, your story as far back as you want to go, the real moments that shaped you becoming who you are and doing what you're doing today.
Sure. I mean, listen, I was born in Argentina, but grew up in the United States. So I was one when I came over, and well, I always say my dad came over because his brother was up here working in a factory, and he had started his own business that didn't work out, and so he came up to the United States and figured he'd make some money and then come back to Argentina, and came up here and realized he could make more money in the United States than he could owning his own and working at a factory than he could owning his own business in Argentina.
Wow.
I think my mom came up begrudgingly and still is here begrudgingly, but in the end, I'm an immigrant. My parents are immigrants, and we didn't. We grew up well in the United States, but my mom sort of gave me that idea that we came here for a reason, and we needed to do more. And my dad was always worked 6 hours. I'm sorry, 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week on third shift, and so I think I got the hard work efforts from my dad and the nothing's ever good enough from my mom. So I think I'm a combination of both. That being said, I work in operations, and in the heart of what we do is the manufacturing piece. And I think of everyone that works in my organization. There's somebody's dad, right? There's somebody's mom. There's somebody's uncle. There's somebody's sister or brother, and those are tough jobs. And I want to make sure that in the end, it starts with making sure that we create a work environment that is safe so that everyone goes home safe. We make chocolate for a living. No one should ever get hurt making chocolate. But then some place that they can enjoy and have fun, and get great results at the same time. Help be a part of something more than just clocking in and going to work. I want people to bring their brains to work. I want people to bring their passion to work. Yeah, no matter what job you do.
Yeah, I love that. And so you've done and worked in a lot of really interesting organizations. Reading out the bio earlier for you, there's some big names on there like Pepsi, and but for you, as you look back, what are some of the moments, maybe as an older leader, in the past maybe 10 or 20 years, are there any moments, or go further back if you want, that really come to mind that have really shaped you in your leadership to become who you are today?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. It's hard to parse them all out. Certainly early on in my career when I was at Campbell Soup, I think you always get shaped by other leaders, right? I think that's the key. So I'll tell you that I was brought to Campbell Soup by a friend of mine, Mike Dunn, and at the time I was his maintenance manager, and then it became his operations manager, and eventually the product manager where I ran his Pace and Prego facility for him.
Mm,
And he taught me how to, lean processes. And I say lean or continuous improvement, but really the key was engaging our operators and making
mm,
them a part of the solution, getting their ideas. And I always think, it's if someone's working a job 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, they know how to make things better. And so a lot of what we need to do is just ask people and engage them and make them a part of being successful and making their jobs better. Because if their jobs are better, our jobs become better. So I think I learned that from Mike and Campbell Soup that, it's critical to engage folks on the floor, engage the people that are doing the jobs, making sure that they're a part of the solution and given the opportunity. I at that team, I still remember I had a quality team there
mm.
made up of all operators. They did all the work, and they were the most passionate team around quality that I've ever seen in my entire career.
Wow.
And then I think I've taken that, throughout my career. And I would say, it was going to Pepsi was great because, Pepsi had, I don't know, it's a $90 billion organization, at the time, and so you're not really going to change Pepsi, but they had great processes and great tools. But the key was how do you scale engaging everybody? So, I
Mm,
was a plant manager. I was initially their continuous improvement leader and tried to share that across the organization, became a plant manager for them where I basically took the tools and, you know, um, and embedded them in there with, making sure that we were engaging everybody in the organization. And in a couple of years, and by using the tools, but more importantly than just using the tools, and I keep saying this, if I say this to my team all the time, you can learn Toyota manufacturing systems, you can learn Lean Six Sigma, you can learn continuous improvement, but the heart of it is engaging people in the process. And
mm.
if you can't get that, all those tools are like, I may know what a hammer is. It doesn't necessarily mean I know how to build a house. And so, to build a house correctly, you have to make sure you have a foundation, and that foundation is the culture of your organization. So, by connecting the tools with the culture and teaching our teams how to continuously improve, and Pepsi, we made huge performance leaps. We took one of the worst performing plants, and then two and a half years, it became the plant of the year for Pepsi out of 80 plants, and
Wow.
also we won best place to work, which was a different award that we got from Pepsi,
Hmm.
and I was really proud of that. And then from there, I think it's been a lot of duplication in those processes. At Pinnacle, I actually got to build the lean processes with my team, and that was exciting too. Never losing fact of where we were and where we're going.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's those are a lot of the things that have shaped me in the past.
Yeah, I love your focus on engaging people in the process because I think that is universal principle for leaders. I think in every part of leadership, I just believe it's true where we don't engage people enough in the process. I feel like you can almost look at any leadership situation, and if there's a high engagement in the process of the stakeholders, you're more likely to win, and if it's a lowering, you're more likely to lose. But how to do that, and I think that's why leaders often struggle to do it. Is knowing how to navigate that. So, are there any stories that come to mind? Maybe it doesn't have to be of yours. It could be stories you've come across of others engaging their people in the process, or doing engagement with their people, or stories from your time as a leader so far where you think, wow, that was a real win, or that was a big turnaround, or that the way we involved them, or the way that leader I worked with involved our people in the process was a real key aha moment for you, or just had a particularly meaningful ring to it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a dozen examples throughout my career. The one thing I'd tell you is, and I always tell the people who work for me is you got to your position for a reason. Don't
Mm,
assume that everyone who works for you understands what you know, right? So the
yes.
first part is you've got to get rid of your bias to believe that someone should know something, right? So just because someone's in that position doesn't mean they know everything you know, and doesn't
Mm,
mean they know everything you think they should know. So
mm,
one is you always have to set clear expectations for that person, and then, if they can't deliver against those expectations, you should see that as a failure on yourself. Like, why aren't they delivering? How do I help them deliver?
mm,
And so I'll use an example. When I took my first plant manager role at Pepsi, I had a person who worked for me, and I was told that they're not going to make it. They're not really good. You need to watch that person
yes.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so I started setting expectations, and not only setting expectations, but walking the walk, right? So I expected them to be there when the line started up in the morning. So I showed up when the line started up, and I would call them and say, "Hey, what's going on?" And they're like, "Okay, I'm not there." I'm like, "Well, that's what you're supposed to do." So let's and then we would walk the floor. I'd show up, and then he'd give me an update as to what's going on, and then we'd walk the floor, and I'd start setting higher level expectations about like organization and people and what we should be doing. And so, by doing those things, he became an amazing person, like an amazing leader. And I was able to get the best out of that person by making sure that I was clear about what I needed from him.
Mm,
And I don't think, and right now he's a very successful person. He's doing really well. I'm real proud of what he's done. And
yeah.
and I learned from that experience that, hey, you can anyone who's capable um, can get the job done if you set the right expectations and you help them reach those expectations. And I've taken that from on every time, every area that I moved on to. Now, there are people who have failed in my organization, and it's unfortunate. And I always see that as a failure in myself too. But I've tried to make sure that I've given everyone the right expectations, and
Yes.
then when they weren't meeting them, letting them know and show them. And so when they got to the end of that process, they at least felt, or at least I hope they felt that they were given a fair shake at the at the role.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of clear expectations. I I love this idea of no surprises, and sort of a bit of a litmus test for leaders is when you walk into a meeting, or and there's always the exceptions to the rule, right? There are those times where someone's going to be surprised for some reason, but as much as you can, if you've set, like exactly what you said, you set clear expectations, and then you walk the walk and actually help people know whether they're meeting those expectations. What you get rid of is a lot of these big surprises that never really work out in anyone's favor. No one really wins. Instead, you're better off having these small conversations. How do you, I guess, to break it down, what have you learned about setting expectations? What would you say to a leader listening who goes, I don't think I do that very well? How can people improve setting expectations with their people?
Well, I don't think it's a once a year thing. right? So if you're waiting for the HR cycle and saying, oh, it's that annual review time and let me set expectations, those become, how do I put it? They become sort of like, well, let me give you these high level metrics that I expect you to deliver. Here's some big projects that I want you to do. And if you're waiting for once a year cycle, that's not really setting clear expectations. I set regular one-on-ones with my team, and a big part of what we talk about is how are they delivering what they're supposed to deliver? What are the key things that they need? What resources do they need to get done? Are they clear about what is important and what's not important? And I'm also, I hate to use the term, the gift of feedback, but I give people a lot of feedback. So if you're not meeting expectations, I'm pretty clear about, whether you're meeting them or not meeting them. And look, I want to celebrate as much as possible as when we are meeting expectations, but we all need to be working on. I tell my boss too, is like that. In general, I think I do a pretty good job. So, like, you need to tell me when you don't think I'm doing a good job, so I can recalibrate myself. And
Mm.
so it's an iterative process, right? You have to be consistent about it. You have to make sure that you're communicating on a regular basis, and that lack of communication, if you don't have that communication, it's really on you as a person. Like, that's the key thing to have, is making sure that you're in a regular cadence to make sure that people are on track and trying to deliver, because it's easy to go off the rails. And um, you want to make sure that if they do start going off the rails, you rectify the situation as fast as possible and get them back on track.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and I agree. We need to stop thinking of these once a year or even the once a quarter. Whatever the pattern is, we need to stop thinking about that and instead make it part of the regular one-on-one, and even more regular than that. For some leaders who are walking the halls with their leaders or on the floor with their people, is make it so that they know every day what the expectations are and whether they're meeting it in small ways, in those little conversations. I think that's just a better way. I think there's so many reasons that's a better process. Um, I know that developing people is really something that you're very passionate about. So can you speak a little bit to that, and I guess particularly what you've learned about how to really invest in people and develop the people in your team and in your organization, and any real keys that you've learned or you've come across that you think are particularly, really great levers that leaders can pull to really invest and develop the people in their team and in their organization.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying, I think when I look back on my career, I'm not always, there's certain things that I'm very proud of, but most of the time they're not metric based. Most of the time they're the people that I feel I've left behind and made that organization stronger, or even made that person stronger. Or, recently I'll get a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn and, just thank me from time to time and say, hey, I just wanted you to know I'm in this position. I just had lunch with a friend of mine who used to be a mechanic for me, and now he's running an entire supply chain operations for a company out on the West Coast. And it
Wow.
just makes me excited that people are able to, move up and change and grow, and that you were a part of that development. To me, that's the most exciting piece of it. Listen, on the development piece, I think, it's not formulaic. I think you need to
Mm,
learn each person. You need to learn what motivates them. You need to let them uh, try and fail. And
yes.
I had a boss once tell me, and it was Mike Dunn, the guy from Campbell Soup,
Yeah.
and I let off on this. He told me this is what he wanted me to do, and I started going down my direction, and I started telling him. Well, later on, it didn't work out, and he goes, "Oh, I knew it wasn't going to work out." I'm like, "Well, why didn't you try and stop me?" He's like, "You're too hard headed. There's no way I was going to stop you. I figured it's better for you to learn the hard way." And I thought about that. It's kind of true, and I see this all the time. Sometimes you've got to, it's got to be controlled, right? Like, you can't let people fail big, but you certainly need to let them try small, experiments and not be successful, or give them, show them after that, oh, maybe there was a better way that you could have done this. And it's not, they're all teaching moments. And I think if you don't let people try, and if you don't let them bring their own passion to it, they're not going to be as successful as you want. If you just tell them, hey, here's the cookie cutter approach that I need you to deliver, it's like painting by numbers, or truly painting a piece of art. You got to let people go out of the line sometimes. And I always say this, like, especially in big operations, like you said before, like Godiva was a big, complicated operation.
Yeah.
There's 1,000 things we could do today to make this organization better. My job is to prioritize the work, and then let people do the things that are the biggest impact to the organization, but let them decide which ones they want to do. Like, I don't tell them, oh, you have to go do this because it's going to save us this way. I mean, sometimes I'll come up with an idea myself and ask them about it, put it on the list of stuff that we need to get done. But I want them to think of, how do I make the biggest impact? And this, if this is where they believe they can make the biggest impact, let them go do it. Because if you have passion around it, you're more likely to be successful. If it's your boss telling you to go do something, you're less likely, you have an out if it doesn't work. It's like, well, my boss told me to do this and it didn't work. I knew it wasn't going to work. So better for them to come to me and say, hey, boss, I have this great idea. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm like, great. Let's start working on it. And I think if you that's where people thrive, because they feel that they feel like they're bringing value, and they feel like they're valued because their ideas are being valued.
Yeah, that's so good. They feel like they're bringing value, and they're being valued because their ideas are being valued. In a big operation like Godiva, how do you manage? How do you balance letting people fail, letting people choose their own, take their own ideas and run with them, with all the streamlining and of an organization of that size, where I guess so much, when you get that size, a lot of what you're doing, I imagine, would be very process, and systems would get more and more and more important the larger you get. So how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, look, I think, I've done this in the last bunch of organizations. It's my job to define the rules of the game, right? So I set the guide rails for the organization, for the operations, right? So this is how we're going to work. So for example, when I got to Godiva, there was a productivity program, but it wasn't very disciplined. So, I've changed it. And, we said, we're going to pull all the ideas from all the teams into one funnel and put it in one area, so that we can prioritize all the work. We're going to meet as a team once a month, and then we're going to ideate once a quarter, and on each team. And we're going to have monthly cost reviews with each team, and we're going to track against how they're doing. And so the ideas that they bring are their ideas.
Yes.
I just help them prioritize, right? So I want people working on the $1 million ideas, not the $35,000 ideas. And not that the $35,000 ideas aren't good. It's just that, the $1 million ideas are better, right? So because there's limited resources, and so we want to make sure that everyone's focused on the right areas of the organization. And so just bringing the process, to me, is bringing discipline to the organization, not necessarily taking away from their passion. It helps, to me, the process helps focus their passion in the right ways.
Yeah, that's so true. It's I guess this is a bit of a philosophical question, but why do you think, if we look at so many leaders around the world, and we look at leadership the past 10 or 20 years, I feel like I hear so many people talk about what we're talking about here, but I really do see so many leaders struggle to do this, in terms of really releasing people in their passion, and leaders end up sort of strangling the life out of teams, because they keep everything so controlled, and people don't have that opportunity to fail and lead and stretch. What is it that you've seen? Like, why do you think this is such a challenge for leaders to do this well, when it's so important?
That's a good question. I think it depends also the environment that you work in, right? It's not always easy to get stuff done
Mm.
if you don't have, like, if the leaders aren't being managed that way either, right? So, um,
That's true.
I don't know. I think, a lot of times leaders, there's a lot of smart people out there, and they got to the level that they are because how smart they are, and the realization is, to me, is it's not just about you, right? You have to figure out how do you collectively, because collectively we're always smarter. Uh,
Yes.
40 people are going to have a lot more ideas than one person, and so it's harnessing those folks and those ideas, and not always it doesn't always come out that way. I think the other thing is, I think what I mentioned earlier is, it's those expectations of what people know. You got to your level and your position because of what you know, and what your experiences were, and you can't assume that everybody in the organization or the people that work for you have those same experiences or have the same knowledge that you have. So it's your job as a leader to help them bridge that divide.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's
Can you
some.
hear me okay? I'm just making sure that
Yeah.
my computer's starting to lose power. I have to plug it in.
Yes. Yeah. No, I can hear you. Okay. No worries. Yeah. So that's. I think you made some really good points there. For for a leader, when it comes to investing in their people and setting expectations and um, just generally developing people. I know it's not formulaic, but I like to sort of always try to narrow down and get people to sort of prioritize one idea. If someone was sitting across from you over a coffee and said, "Okay, Pablo, just give me one thing. If you could only do one thing to go into an organization that would really impact the people development, what do you think it would be? One idea, one initiative, one what one thing? If you had to pick one, what would it be?
Oh boy. Look, I can't do one. I'm going to give you two, and I'm going to cheat on this question.
Yeah, sure.
So, I think there's two things, and the reason I'm going to say there's two, especially if you're looking at a large organization like my own, and look, I didn't come up with this stuff. I always feel like, I learned from better teachers in the past. There's a book called Toyota Kata. I don't know if you've read it at all,
No, I haven't. No.
but it talks about the Toyota. Everyone talks about Toyota manufacturing. Everyone tries to replicate it. They come out of there similar to what I've mentioned before, with the tools that Toyota uses, but still not understanding how to build a house.
Yes.
And Kata is really explaining the mindset of the leadership in Toyota, where every day the supervisors that are on the floor are meeting with all their operators, multiple times a shift, and basically asking them about their performance. How are they performing today, and versus their targets, and are they delivering against their targets? And it sounds very simple, and very formulaic. And you go, well, shouldn't all supervisors do that? And the answer is yes, but most don't. Most are fighting fires, and when they don't have to fight a fire, they come up for a breath and say, ah, and so they're not focused on improvement. And so, one, I think, to me, in the last multiple organizations that I've been in, that's been critical, is teaching the frontline supervision, the ones that have affect the most amount of people in the organization, how to challenge the teams on the floor on what their targets are, making sure that they're engaging their teams in the business, and making sure that every person in the company is engaged in delivering better results for the company. So I think and I call that the bottoms up approach, is making sure that the organization that has the most people are effectively armed to be successful, because that's where you're going to make the most amount of improvement on a regular basis. The second thing is the top down approach. And if you read the book Measure What Matters,
Yes.
it talks about OKRs and how do you set those objectives and key results for everybody in the organization, and making sure that they cascade throughout the organization.
Hmm.
And so, I kind of like, if you want to build a tunnel, correctly, you always start on one end and try to dig to the other. But if you want to make it fast, you have to start on both sides. And so I think you start top down with OKRs and bottoms up with the Toyota Kata process. And I think that's been my recipe for success recently.
Yeah, I think that's. I love the OKRs and Measure What Matters, and it's a great book. And I haven't read the Toyota Kata book, but it sounds like a great read. And I think you've just, I think that's just a brilliant couple of ideas that work together. And I love the tunnel analogy. Let's break it down, because I have to admit I'm a bit of a leadership nerd when it comes to this stuff. I really love hearing how people are doing when it comes to OKRs. I think one of the things for me is these sort of ideas. It's so easy. I've been in my shoes before, where I've actually experienced, yeah, this is great, and then I go to do it and I go, oh, okay, how do I actually do this? So for people out there, let's unpack both of these ideas a bit more, because I can hear that I think you do these really well. So let's start with the bottom up approach. If you were coming to a new team, and you were going to implement this, I guess from a more granular approach, what would it look like? What do the conversations look like? Yeah, can you give us a bit more of a breakdown of how you would lead that in terms of getting that Toyota Kata approach of the getting your feedback coming up?
Yeah, it's not easy. So I always say it's the idea of teaching people. So the problem isn't necessarily so for example, at Ventura Foods, we did this and we were very successful. That was the last company that I was in.
Yeah.
And we had an L&D team there, and at the time, they had just launched the L&D team, and I was like, perfect, we're going to create these new processes, and I need you to help teach the teams these new processes. And everyone knew we needed to train our frontline supervisors. They just didn't know how to do it. So we took the Toyota Kata approach, right? And
Yes.
and sort of showed them what it meant to do this every day.
Mm.
The problem is you can't just do it by yourself, because if the managers aren't walking the process with them, then in the end it's just a paper exercise, because no one's checking and no one's coaching the supervisor that we need to do the approach. So we also had to implement the daily walk for the leadership team in the plant, and setting expectations for the managers in the plants to calibrate their supervisors. So it was we called it a layered audit process, which was helpful because it ended up being the acronym of a lap. And so when we said go take a lap, it meant go walk around and coach your employees, and the expectation is you do 3 laps a day. And so initially it became we put it on paper, and we wanted people to do the exercise in the process and write it down, and we kept it in books on the floor so we could reference them, and the managers could go reference them. And even when I did my quarterly business reviews at every plant, part of my responsibility was auditing the process and making sure that I walked with a supervisor. They showed me how they did it. I walked with the manager. And the managers' teams, and showed them my expectations. And so you gotta. It seems easy, but when you have, like, for example, at Ventura Foods, I had 3,200 people that worked in the organization, and I want to say it was like 400 supervisors.
Yeah.
You have to sit and make sure that that the next level up is calibrated, and they're coaching their teams specifically too. Because with 3,200 people, and I have, let's say, 500 supervisors, that means those supervisors have to do 8 laps a day. But then with them, then there's maybe 200 managers, so the managers have to do their laps, and then there's or maybe 200 managers, maybe 100 managers. And so it's easier at the 100 manager level, but where the rubber meets the road is the lowest level of the organization. Yeah. And so me setting the example, walking through it quarterly, I was part of the training, so I would go physically to the trainings to make sure people understand how important this was. This wasn't just a HR trained process. This was coming from the top of the organization on what it meant to be successful. And then giving them the reasons why it needed to be successful, right? So I keep telling, I had, we had 14 plants in Ventura Foods, and I kept trying to explain to people, look, if you're successful here doing this process, then I know you can be successful anywhere. And so the people who are going to be promoted are going to be the people who are successful in the process that we've defined.
Yeah.
Because I am comfortable that if you're great at what you do here and you're doing it through our process, that you can take those learnings and bring it to another plant. And by the way, because I have 14 plants, I may not have a production manager position open tomorrow in Waukesha, but I have a production manager position probably open 3 times a year somewhere in my organization. And so if you want that job, I can get you that job, but you have to prove that you're the best out of the couple hundred supervisors that are competing for that role.
Yeah. So how do you do accountability for that sort of level of doing the walk arounds? And so there's modeling it yourself, there's turning up to the training. I love that. But how did you do accountability in terms of did you make it part of KPIs? I'm just interested what processes you use to hold people accountable to bring that process in and make sure it happened.
Yeah, over time we did. Initially we didn't because we didn't want it to be a punitive thing, right, or just measuring.
Yeah.
And I also didn't want people just filling out paperwork because Pablo told them to fill out paperwork, right? I think people get sometimes too wrapped up into, oh, I have to do 3 walks a day and I'm going to get dinged if I don't make my 3 walks a day. So what we did do is we automated the process. So we gave everyone iPads, and they could do the laps in the iPads. And not only that, they could take their follow-ups in the iPad. And so if an idea came out of it or an issue, a correction came out of it, they could document in the iPad. They could also escalate those to their manager, or to the daily management meeting, or to the gap closure calls, which was all additional steps of the process that we put in. And so I could measure not only how many times people are doing their laps, but I could also measure how many corrective actions they're coming up with, how many corrective actions they're completing, how many ideas they're generating from the floor, how many issues they've corrected. And so what we would do is then we would take those scores and sort of talk to everybody and make it part of our one-on-one sessions, right? So if
Yes.
I'm talking to a manager, I'm looking at their supervisors and comparing them to everyone else and saying how well their performance is on certain things and why aren't they achieving it. So I'm holding the manager accountable to making sure he's walking with his teams and giving them their feedback. The managers are then using that information to give back to their one-on-one. So it became a good feedback mechanism. You do have to be careful with that, because I'd say is you first set the expectations and start showing people how to do it and walk the walk and expect the training. Then later on you start measuring. What you don't want to happen is because these are sort of soft metrics, right? They're not efficiency, labor cost, waste cost, or whatever, which are easy understood. How many times you walk the floor can easily be sort of manipulated in a system. And so it's important that the KPIs don't overcome the fact that, like, are people doing the quality work? So it's making sure you walk with them and audit the process and make sure it's done correctly, and not just hope that the metrics drive you to the right answer.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue into OKRs, because I know that is it John? How do you pronounce his last name? John Doerr, who wrote Measure What Matters. I know he talks about quality and quantity as particularly in the key results part of that, and I think you've unpacked that a little bit already there, because you're saying measurement is what you use to help reinforce the process, but when you're creating the process, you really do want it to come from the why. You do want it to come from a place where people understand it. You do want to train exceptionally well so that there's, I guess, a bit of an effortlessness to it and automate it, and then the measurement comes in to help reinforce it, which I think is some great advice. If we talk about OKRs now, for those listening who don't know what OKRs are, do you want to give just a bit of a breakdown of that idea, and then how how you would use that from a top-down approach.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of OKRs, and I've heard it, even before John Doerr's book, in different ways, and I've used it in different ways before that. But it's really setting from a top level the objectives and key results of the organization, and then everyone behind that then setting their own objectives and key results that support the top level's results. So from everywhere in the organization, I should be able to link how that person's results are going to link to the business results for the organization. And so, I may set for the organization that we need to deliver, reduction in safety, an improvement in quality, a cost per pound improvement on our conversion cost, and then that may link to my CI team. Then they're going to work on, driving a productivity program that saves 3 to 5% savings across the organization. It may link to my production team, my plant management team, and looking at their cost per pound or reducing waste or whatsoever. So it's cascading down the objectives and the key results and letting everyone sort of figure out how to do it. I think Pepsi did this the best because, and this was even before the book OKRs came out, but at Pepsi, at the time I was there, it was very clear. The organization wanted 3% growth in volume, 3% improvement in pricing, and 3% reduction in cost. And so that was sort of the top level objectives. And so then we would cascade down. Okay, how do I translate that for my team?
Yeah.
And so then my team would take my objectives and say, okay, how do I translate? And I would work with my team to say, okay, here's my objectives. How does that work for you? And how do you make sure these are successful? And so normally what I do is I take the overall OKRs for the organization, list them on the side, then list my objectives for my team, and then I list everybody on the top. And so my entire team can see everybody's objectives, and we're crystal clear about where everybody's going to deliver, and we're all aligned. And we have a conversation once a year to say, is that the right level? Should this person have more of this and less of this? And we have the debate openly. And so that everyone feels good about, hey, do we feel like everybody's working for the same goals here in the organization? Because we probably all have worked in an organization where we don't feel everyone's, that this person may not be working for the same goals as this person might be. And so, that's where politics forms. And I want to try to dissipate that as much as possible. I want transparency as to what we're all trying to achieve.
And so, just getting practical, or even more practical and a bit more granular, how many OKRs would you normally have for yourself as in a role like you're in, now as the chief supply chain officer? How many OKRs do you normally have for yourself, for your team, and then how many do each of your team members normally have for their teams?
I wish I was better at this. So I would say normally you don't want to have more than like 4 or 5. Yeah. I think we always end up with like 7 to 10 in the end. And especially at like it's harder when you're up a level in the organization. So even if you don't have 7 or 10, I think sometimes we end up grouping them together. So 7 or 10 become 5, but reality is like, well, we grouped quality and safety into the same OKR. So when you run a large organization, there's a lot of things that you got to go attach. But lower in the organization, especially like if you're a supervisor or frontline supervisor, shouldn't be more than 3. Yes. I think we want to always try to limit things to about 3 to 5 at max.
And that's, just to be clear, that's 3 to 5 objectives that have key results that come off them.
Yeah.
And have you found, obviously you've got the principles that, in Measure What Matters about making sure your key results are specific. I think he talks a lot around, a saying, or I can't remember if it's in the book or elsewhere, about if you don't have a specific number, then it's not a key result. Like someone was saying that in terms of being quite fanatical about it and needing to have a specific number on it, which I actually think there's some wisdom to that. But is there anything that you've learned about constructing these in a way that that tends to work well if people out there are going, oh, I love this idea of OKRs, and they want to go and read the book and put it into practice? Anything you've learned about how to help teams actually articulate this in a way that sets them up for a win?
Wow, I've had more arguments about this with HR than anybody else, I think. I do. I'm a very sort of, I like numbers, right?
Yeah.
So in general, what I told you about, like I set up my team's objectives, and their key results and expectations. And so usually I have them on a spreadsheet. I list out the numbers that they're expected to deliver, and then I give them and I weight each objective differently on a percentage basis. I'm getting very technical here.
No, this is great.
And then
it's awesome.
and then I color code them. Basically, I try to give them. So the way I like to do it is I give them a raw number as to how they're performing. Every time, every quarter when we meet about the expectations, and generally they know, like they track their numbers well, so they know exactly how they're performing. So most of my great team players can tell me where their opportunities are and where their strengths are.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and I think I know this more than anybody else, is I let the numbers take me one direction, and certainly performance is based on how the results of the organization. But there's sometimes you can't control the numbers, right? We just had we're in the middle of a global pandemic, hopefully coming out of it. No one predicted a global pandemic was going to happen. No one knew what that was going to do to the numbers. And so you can't just say, oh, well, I don't care about the global pandemic. These numbers are what they are, right? So you have to give people sway in some of that stuff. The other piece of it is, and that's sort of a really macro level view, but there's minor things that happen that aren't necessarily the fault of the leader. So I always sort of say, okay, I'm going to weigh out the numbers, and generally they fall. We have a scale generally of like a 1 to 5 rating for a person.
Yes.
And so more or less, most of the time they fall somewhere in the middle. There's always a pretty good distribution curve, and so I also can see am I being too am I too aggressive in the numbers, or am I too conservative in the numbers, or my numbers are weighted too high or too low? But then I always sort of say the how is up to me, right? So if someone ends up at a 3.5 based on how, I have the flexibility as a manager to say they're a 4 or they're a 3, right? So are they on above target performance, or are they on target performance? And that's really based on the way they show up as a leader, and that's more less subjective and more objective in my mind. So there's got to be a good mix of both subjectivity. I'm sorry, it's more subjective than objective. But so it's got to be a mix of both objective measures and subjective measures.
Have you found many experiences where someone's hitting a 5 in terms of the numbers, but as a leader, you feel like they're really only showing up as a 1 or a 2?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know if it's ever a 1 or a 2, right? So I've certainly had people, and so I'll be frank with you. If you're delivering the numbers, and I've had these conversations where people are over delivering the numbers, and I'll say, hey, look, you should have been in above target, but or a 5 in performance, but I'm giving you a 4. And this is the reasons why, because I don't feel like you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not doing what I expect you. You're hitting all the expectations, but you're not doing it the way we want you to do it. And here's the things I need you to fix. And believe it or not, sometimes those conversations are harder than someone getting a below target performance. And I tell them at the same time is, look, you have to keep up this level of performance to continue to get a 4. You don't be, but if your performance falls below, then your numbers are going to be weighted down if you don't fix the things I've asked you to. So you may be a 4 today, and next year, because a lot of times results can be lucky. Next year, if you're a 3 on target performance, you're going to be weighted down to a 2 if you don't change the behaviors that are underlying, that are creating me to believe that you're not the right leader for the role. And so a lot of times people fix it. A lot of times people don't know how to fix it. And over time, their performance strips because no one has perfect years every year, right? It's almost impossible for that unless you're setting way too conservative objectives.
Yeah, and that's what I love about OKRs. I love the way that OKRs are based on sort of stretch, having this idea of stretch goals, having this accountability, and particularly the ownership because people are so involved in coming up with them. And I have a bit of a theory around why those conversations are harder, like you're saying, with people when sometimes the conversations where they've performed at a 5, but you have to tell them it's a 4. The results are a 5, sorry, but the way they're doing some things, it makes it a 4. And it's because, in my experience, when you have people where you're saying to them, look, the way you're doing things, it's not a 5, it's a 4. Often you're talking about how people, how people are as team players, how they communicate, how they lead people, which sometimes isn't as obvious in the results as other things. And I feel like those things which come to vulnerability and humility, and I love Patrick Lencioni's Ideal Team Player book because he talks about those three traits of an ideal team player: humility, hunger, and people smart. Well, he says smart, but I people smart, that idea of emotional intelligence. And if you look at those three, hungry is the one where it's sometimes people really tick that, but if 2 out of the 3 are areas of growth where someone is really struggles with humility, they're not good at admitting they made mistakes, they're not they're not great at letting people in, they there's a struggle with humility. And if there's a struggle with the people smart and emotional intelligence, and they don't quite catch it if they're actually offending people or they're not necessarily getting to know and connecting with their people well, that I think can often be the person, in my experience, where you go, your results are a 5, but actually in terms of how you're doing X, Y, and Z, it's a 4. And then the recipe, I think why this becomes such a challenge is that's the person who's going to not have seen it. That's often the person, like with humility. I feel like if you lack humility, it's actually a blind spot. Like pride, if there's any sort of pride that comes from any sort of reason where it actually blinds you. So it's this like it's a bit of a vicious cycle because it's the very people that are going to end up in that situation are the ones who are least likely to be self-aware about it. And so that's where you might end up, certainly in my experience anyway, you end up with people where you go, I assumed you would have seen this in some way, but they're quite caught off guard because they haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's funny because I love Patrick Lencioni, and he talks about humble, hungry, and smart. And if you don't have the humility piece, the rest is sort of irrelevant. Like that's the one that's when he's cornered, he'll tell you that's the most important one.
That's right. Yeah.
And so learning, and I think that's the hard part. And you asked earlier about like why people don't sort of understand the empowerment of the organization. And I think it is because people lack that humility. In the end, like you have to believe that your team is going to be the ones that deliver the results. Your job as a leader is to get them to deliver results. I've had leadership teams tell me in the past that, and I've heard this before from a leadership team, and I'm not going to say who it was, but they said, the reason we got the results is because of the capability of the leadership team, despite the capability of the team below us. And I'm like, you got that totally backwards. The reason you got the results is because of the team below you, despite the arrogance of this team here at the top level. And their failure to recognize that as leaders, that they were really the ones causing the problems. But it's an interesting book. I love Patrick Lencioni's. I'm actually taking my team out as one of our offsites, and we're walking through the 5 dysfunctions of a team because I think he's probably one of the the better sort of leadership teamwork kind of building author I've read in my life.
Yeah, I would agree. He's definitely my favorite author in that space. I just find it's the Working Genius. His the recent assessment that's come out of the Table Group. Have you come across that yet, or used that yet?
I've heard, I've read it, I've listened to his podcast so far. I've not gotten the latest stuff from Patrick Lynch from his books, but I'm excited to get it and use it as an assessment tool because usually my second big offsite is first is the 5 dysfunctions of the team. The second is sort of let's do a team assessment and see where we are, and generally use
Yes.
Myers-Briggs. And so I'm excited to use Patrick Lencioni's tools to see, okay, where do we fall and understand it better too. But I think it's important for everyone to understand what motivates everyone. And I think we were saying that before, right? Everyone's different as an individual. So how do you make sure that you find the right passions for that person? And how do
Yeah.
you make sure that the teams are engaging people correctly to make sure everyone's working at their top performance?
Yeah, it's Working Genius is fantastic. It's just like the 5 dysfunctions of a team, actually, in terms of I can't put my finger on why it's so good, but you know how the 5 dysfunctions of a team gives you these 5 vulnerability, conflict, commitment, accountability, results, or breeds individual ego, inattention to results at the top. It gives you it's not so much the framework. I still haven't worked out why I think they're so good compared to other things, but it's how applicable they are as handles for a team. I just feel like, and it's the same with the Working Genius. I've sort of done it with, I've been doing that with teams now, and I've so enjoyed it because once again, it's a bit like the 5 dysfunctions. You start it, and it's like any other assessment, and you go, oh well, but then the richness of how people grab onto it, and then 3 months later, the conversations you have, and you find out how people have actually used it, is a real game changer. And to be honest, I wasn't sure when I first came across it. I was like, oh, when I first heard about it, but now that I've used it, I do sort of swear by it. It's definitely become one of my favorite tools to use because of the handles. It's just like once you do it, people have, and he talks about this in the podcast. If listeners want to find out more, there's a great podcast called The Working Genius podcast where Patrick Lencioni focuses specifically on this new assessment that they really believe is some of the most important work they've ever done at the Table Group. There's also the Table Group podcast with Patrick Lencioni, At the Table with Patrick Lencioni, 2 brilliant podcasts. But Working Genius, I think they're right. I honestly think it's as significant as they believe it is. And it's because it taps into something where all the assessments I've done, I feel like the one weakness is often the split second. How do I apply that assessment to this go? That instantaneous, is this a yes or a no for you personally and for a team? And the Working Genius has that. And it's really profound. Anyway, I've just given a little spiel for the Working Genius there because I'm a bit of
No,
a
I think
Patrick
it's
Lencioni mega fan.
Yeah, so am I. And honestly, I think it gives people a common language to use, which is always sort of the hard part, right? It's making sure people understand what behaviors we have and how to call them out the right way.
Yeah.
But do it to me, that's like an important breakthrough for a team is understanding where our opportunities are. I think the best, like when I've put teams together, the strongest teams I've ever seen is when each team member, the people that work for me, help each other, right? So when they see someone having a behavior that's not successful, they're calling them up after the meeting and saying, "Hey, let me give you some feedback." It's not just me; it's the entire team going and
Yes.
holding that person up and trying to make sure that that person is successful. And that's so hard to achieve.
Yeah.
But it's magic when it happens.
It's like in a video game where you sort of unlock the next level. Is like that. I feel like when you're operating in a team where that's not happening, you sort of look at it and you go, huh. But then when you're in an experience, and this is what I always tell teams, I say, it is possible. It's that Patrick Lencioni phrase that he talks about with building a healthy team. It's both possible and remarkably simple, but it's painfully difficult. And it is like, to get there is painfully difficult because you have to walk through, often, I know for me anyway, when you're trying to do conflict well and have robust discussions, you've got family of origin, you've got some of us pick up, passive aggressive rather than being direct, and you've got to unlearn some of these things, and you've got to practice going there and actually risking it and being vulnerable. But the win on the other side is like that unlocking a level where, and you're right, I reckon that is one of the biggest pieces of fruit. If you want to see this happening, it's because the people on the team, not just the leader, will call each other up after a meeting and give some feedback. That is such rich soil for a team and an organization. I feel like you just go to a whole other level when you've got that going on.
Yeah, that happened to me recently. I had a team, someone that was working for me. He was just, it went off the rails in a meeting, and two of his peers called him right after the meeting and said, "Hey, let me give you some feedback," and do that. And I found out about it afterwards, and certainly I gave when I called that person up and was giving him my feedback. He's like, "Yeah, I know, this person called me and this person called me," and so then I doubled back and called the other two guys, and I'm like, "I am so excited that you guys called your
Yeah.
peer and helped him out and picked him up and told him what he needed to do different next time." And I said, that is exactly the behaviors. And so encouraging those behaviors is the best I could do in that standpoint. But I think nothing made me more proud than the fact that those guys went and tried to help out a peer of them to be successful. And they're not, like, and I've been in organizations where that happens and people are like, "Oh, thank God that wasn't me." Thank God.
Yeah. It's like, just, where do I look right now? I'll just
This is just bloody.
Yeah. No, that's right. Stepping in and I, once again, Patrick Lencioni says this. I just love everything he does. But he talks about this idea of, peer-to-peer accountability in a team, and the beauty of the fact that as a leader, when you're not willing to hold your people accountable, your team are going to go, "Well, I'm not going to do it for you," and so you end up needing to do more accountability. So the less willing you are, the more you're likely going to need to have difficult conversations, which is brutal. But if you are willing to step in and go there, particularly in this idea of picking small battles and going there in the little things and stepping into the uncomfortable, awkward, sort of moments as a leader of the team, your people are going to go, "Oh, okay. Well, if you're willing to bleed, to actually be vulnerable, to go there, then I'll step up and do it too." And so, ironically, you then often need to do less of the accountability and difficult conversations if you're willing to do them, which I just find, as someone who really hates having those conversations, that's a great carrot for me to, to go, no, I do need to do this for a number of reasons. And one of them is that doing this and stepping into it is actually going to mean I probably need to do this less. Because I'm going to help create a culture where this can happen.
It's funny you say that, because I think, like, no one, and Patrick Lencioni says this well too, is no one likes the conflict, but if you don't have the conflict, the behaviors don't change. And so, what you can't allow as a leader is to have bad behaviors on your team continue. And I've made those mistakes too, right? So I think we all have in our past, and you realize, man, I should have had much more difficult conversations or made more difficult decisions because that created more problems on my team than necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I've definitely experienced that. Well, Pablo, this has been just a joy. I've so enjoyed this. Did you want to give any sort of final thoughts for listeners as we wrap up?
No, I mean, this has been a pleasure. Thanks, Jono, for inviting me, and we'll talk soon, I guess.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you to all of our listeners. We really appreciate you listening in. I know for a fact you would have gotten so much out of today, and I reckon there's a fair chance we have created some new Patrick Lencioni fans, which is always a good thing too, because I do truly deeply believe in his work. But thank you to all of our listeners. Really appreciate you and what you're doing as leaders in all different parts of the world, all different sectors. And I just want to come back to Pablo Cussatti and just say thank you again, and want to reiterate how much of a pleasure it's been chatting about all things leadership today, and for me learning a bunch of things as well. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and being so generous with your time, Pablo.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, I hope today's leadership question has helped you in your leadership and put a stone in your shoe. That's what I love to say, is that my role, I believe, working with leaders is about putting a stone in your shoe. So something you were really comfortable with, now you're walking a little bit uncomfortably, going, is there a better way to do this? How do I handle this? And that's because no growth is comfortable. So I hope that's okay. I appreciate you taking the time. I don't take it lightly. And if you are just joining us, then make sure you check out our website, consultclarity.org, consultclarity.org. We have so much free content on there for you, including the 7 Questions on Leadership series. So more than 1,500 leaders around the world, different roles, different sectors, have filled out the 7 questions on leadership. In-depth answers on how they lead, what they've found most challenging, how they structure their time, what book or books have been most significant for them. There is so much gold on there. You could go and basically live in that part of our website for a few weeks, I think. So make sure you go and check that out. It's free. And hey, we would love to interview you for our 7 Questions on Leadership series. Your leadership, based on your context, your life, and your experience, I believe that you can bring something that other leaders can learn from. I truly do. And so it's completely free to get involved. It's a great way to give back if you're loving this content. And you can do that by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest, and then click on the page, fill out the form to express your interest, and we can get you going to fill out the 7 questions on leadership. We also have a free resource on our website. It's right at the top, consultclarity.org, on our homepage, and it's called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook with interviews from 10 world-class leaders, and it's right there for you to download. It's completely free, and awesome resource. It's very popular, so check that out. We also have a daily email, and I know that our more than 15,000 leaders who subscribe get a lot of value from that. We highlight the best content from our blogs, from our podcasts, from our books and books we're reading. It also gives you exclusive and limited access and early access to our masterclasses and workshops. So I really try to make it something as helpful and as valuable as possible. That's my commitment. And so go to consultclarity.org/subscribe if you're interested in all things leadership, and you can become part of that community. Now, my gift to you with everything we're doing, particularly with this podcast, the Leadership Question of the Day, is to work really hard to provide the best leadership content to invest in you and your leadership. Your gift to me would be this. If you're finding this helpful, if this helps you in your leadership, then there is something you can do that makes a massive difference, and that is to write a review or rate our content. Wherever you're listening or watching, rate our content, write a review, make sure you subscribe or follow. It might seem small to you to do that, but it adds up and it helps us to help more leaders become the best they can be. It also means a lot to me personally whenever I see you sharing our content, so thank you so much for that. If you do share it on social media, then look for me, John O. White, and try to tag me, and look for Clarity and tag us. And I promise we are always looking for content shared by our community. When people share our content, we're looking to engage with you. And there's also a chance that we may actually share what you write as a post with our followers. So if you do that, there's a chance you'll be shared as well. Last of all, you can check out my book called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because more than 50% of the leaders I coach, 50% of the sessions, where I coach leaders, this comes up again and again and again. And it's leaders saying, Jono, how do I deal with this difficult person? Or how do I deal with this person? And I'm finding it so difficult. We're just on a different wavelength. And that's because difficult conversations are difficult. And I find this is one of the biggest challenges for leaders in the world today. And that's where Step Up or Step Out is a 3-step process to help you deal well with difficult people. I really believe it's a book that can help you in your leadership. So go and check that out. It's on Amazon, Step Up or Step Out, John O. White, if you just look that up, or go to store.consultclarity.org/book and you can get it there. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode of the Leadership Question of the Day next time. I hope today has helped you take another step towards becoming everything you're meant to be. We'll see you next time.